Hello everyone, I'm Indira from Department of Mass Communication, Mizoram University. Today I'm going to discuss on a topic called Science Communication, a Contemporary Definition, which is based on a paper by John O'Connor, Burns and Stockelmayer. So friends, let's start. Okay, introduction. Science communication is a growing area of practice and research. During the past 2 decades, the number of activities, courses, and practitioners has steadily increased. But what actually is science communication? In what ways is it different to public awareness of science, public understanding of science, scientific culture, and scientific literacy? Let's discuss. Science communication is not simply encouraging scientists to talk more about their work, nor is it an offshoot of the discipline of communications. Although people may use the term science communication as a synonym for public awareness of science, public understanding of science, scientific culture, or scientific literacy, in fact, many of these terms are often used interchangeably. It should not be confused with these important and closely related terms. So now let's discuss some related terms which is very important in the context of science communication. First, the public. What is public? Let's see. The simplest and most useful definition of the public is every person in the society. It is acknowledged that public is a very heterogeneous group. It is as multifaceted and unpredictable as the individuals that compose it. Next, for the purpose of the science communication activities and or research, at least 6 overlapping groups within society, sometimes known as publics, each with its own needs, interests, attitudes, and levels of knowledge have been identified. These are as follows. Number 1, scientists. In industry, the academic community, and the government. Next, mediators. Mediators are the communicators, including science communicators, journalists, and other members of the media, educators, and opinion makers. Next is decision makers. Decision makers are the policy makers in government and scientific and learned institutions. And next, general public. The 3 groups above, that means scientists, mediators, and decision makers, plus other sectors and interest groups, for example, school children and charity workers. Next is attentive public. What is attentive public? Attentive public is the part of the general community already interested in and reasonably well informed about science and scientific activities. And next, interested public. Interested public is composed of people who are interested in but not necessarily well informed about science and technology. So we can say interested public, we are not necessarily that they should be well informed about science and technology. And other 2 terms, they are the lay public and the science community. So what are the lay publics? Lay public identifies people, including other scientists, who are non-expert in a particular field. That means they are not expert in the particular field. And next is the science community, or science practitioners are people who are directly involved in some aspect of the practice of science. So overall, all these groups comes under the public. So now let's come to participants. Who are the participants? Let's see. Participants are the members of the public who are directly or indirectly involved in science communication. So let's see direct involvement. Direct involvement include visiting a science center, attending science theater, or writing a letter to the editor of a newspaper, on a science-related matter. They are the direct involvement or direct participants. And next, the indirect participants. The venue, sponsor, and promoter of a science communication event may be classified as indirect participants, but may still have a large impact on the success or otherwise of the actual event. Even though they are indirect participants, they are playing a very great role in the success of the scientific event. So we can say participants are individuals who belong to the general public and therefore include scientists, science communicators, business, and members of the media. Now, next, outcomes and responses. Outcomes may be defined as a result of some action, and there is always at least one result of every reaction. And then response. Response has been defined as action, feeling, movement, change, etc., elicited by stimulus or influence. While the meaning of the words response and outcome both equate to consequence, responses are more personal and immediate and therefore more dynamic. Next is awareness. Now, the simple dictionary definition of awareness means as being conscious, not ignorant of something. So when we have science awareness, that means we need to have some conscious about the science activities or science related topics. Now, next term is public awareness of science. So what is this? Let's see. Learning about science can occur in either formal or informal settings. Science education at primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions is the usual formal setting, while informal settings are commonly grouped under the level of either public awareness of science and public understanding of science. Gilbert, Stockelmeyer, and Garnett defined the public awareness of science as a set of positive attitudes towards science and technology that are evidenced by a series of skills and behavioral intentions. Now, on occasions, the term public awareness of science has been used as a synonym for public understanding of science. The aims are similar and the boundaries do overlap, but public awareness of science is predominantly about attitudes towards science. PAS may be regarded as a prerequisite, in fact, a fundamental component of PUS, that is public understanding of science and scientific literacy. Now, next term is public understanding of science. In the context of science education, Millar proposed three aspects of an understanding of science that may be generalized to concisely define the public understanding of science as, number one, understanding of science content or substantive scientific knowledge known as content. Next is understanding of the methods of inquiry, so-called process. And the third one is understanding of science as a social enterprise, awareness of the impact of science on individuals and society, an extensive dimension summarized by the level of social factors. That means we have three. One is content, second is process, and the third one is social factors. Now, the next term is scientific literacy. The interpretation of scientific literacy has changed somewhat over the years, moving from the ability to read and comprehend science-related articles to its present emphasis on understanding and applying scientific principles to everyday life. Although the meaning of the term scientific literacy is sometimes not clear, this condition is due to its complex and dynamic nature rather than to a lack of definition. So there are three broad categories according to Sen, in 1975. First one is practical scientific literacy. Practical scientific literacy is scientific knowledge that can be applied to help solve practical problems. The second one is civic scientific literacy. Civic scientific literacy enables a citizen to become more aware of science and science-related issues so that he and his representatives would not shy away from bringing their common sense to bear upon such issues and thus participate more fully in the democratic process of an increasingly technological society. And the third one is cultural scientific literacy. Cultural scientific literacy is an appreciation of science as a major human achievement, arguably the greatest achievement of our culture. So these are the three categories. And now come to scientific culture. The term scientific culture has been used in many different ways. For example, scientific culture may be considered as a set of values and ethos, practices, methods, and attitudes based on universalism, logical reasoning, organized skepticism, and tentativeness of empirical results that exist within the scientific academic community. Researchers Godin and Gingras propose that scientific and technological culture is the expression of all modes through which individuals and society appropriate science and technology. And also, most European nations use the words scientific culture, culture scientific to describe a field known in the UK as public understanding of science and USA as scientific literacy. There is, however, an important additional emphasis on the cultural environment in which science and the society interact. Scientific culture is an integrated societal value system that appreciates and promotes science per se and widespread scientific literacy as important pursuits. Now come to contemporary definition of science communication. It is apparent that while the terms public awareness of science, public understanding of science, scientific literacy, and scientific culture should not be used interchangeably, considerable commonality thus exists between them. They have broadly compatible aims, but different philosophies, approaches, and emphasis. In essence, number one, public awareness of science aims to stimulate awareness of and positive attitudes or opinions towards science. Next, public understanding of science, as the name suggests, focuses on understanding science, its content, processes, and social factors. Scientific literacy is the ideal situation where people are aware of, interested and involved in, form opinions about, and seek to understand science. Scientific culture is a society-wide environment that appreciates and supports science and scientific literacy. It has important social and aesthetic affective aspects. The aims of scientific awareness, understanding literacy, and culture may be distilled into 5 broad personal responses to science. If sufficient people exhibit these responses, then they may be considered as applying to the public. These personal responses may be grouped under the labeled A, E, I, O, U, the vowel analogy. So let's see what is A, E, I, O, U. So A stands for awareness of science, E stands for enjoyment or other affective responses to science, I stands for interest in science, the forming, reforming or confirming of science-related, O for opinions or attitudes, and U for understanding of science. The voweled analogy, that is A, E, I, O, U, is a concise level that personalizes the impersonal aims of scientific awareness, understanding, literacy and culture, and thereby defines the purpose of science communication. Now, according to 2000 report, Science and the Public, a review of science communication and public attitudes to science in Britain, defines science communication as a term that encompasses communication between groups within the scientific community, including those in academia and industry. That means if there is communications between these groups, then there is science communication. The next is the scientific community and the media. The scientific community and the public. And if there is communications between the scientific community and government or others in positions of power and or authority. And also the scientific community and government or others who influence policy, industry and the public, the media, including museums and science centers and the public, the government and the public. So science communications may be defined as the use of appropriate skills, media activities, and dialogue to produce one or more of the following personal responses to science, the voweled analogy. That is, awareness, including familiarity with new aspects of science. Next is enjoyment or other affective responses, example, appreciating science as entertainment or art. Interest, as evidenced by voluntary movement with science or its communication. Next is opinions, the forming, reforming, or confirming of science-related attitudes. Then understanding of science, its content, processes, and social factors. So we can say science communication may involve science practitioners, mediators, and other members of the general public, either peer-to-peer or between groups. Now comes to Science Communications Toolkit. The proposed definition identifies skills, media activities, and dialogue as enabling the process of science communication. They may be thought of as the tools of science communications. That means skills, media and activities, and dialogue. So now let's see skills. Various personal skills are the intangible basis of science communication. The skills may directly relate to communicating science at an interpersonal or public level, or more indirectly applied to designing, organizing, or facilitating science activities. That means if indirectly applied, one can do science activities, organizing an event, or facilitating. Next is media and activities. Now, a wide variety of media and activities are necessary to cater for the large range of personalities, learning styles, social and educational backgrounds that people bring to their experience with science. Although the following list is far from comprehensive, it gives a broad overview of some common approaches. Let's see. Examples of formal science communication, which, like formal learning, typically are well structured, compulsory, assessed, planned, and solitary. That includes science education at school, colleges, and universities that may include lectures, tutorials, workshops, laboratory sessions, and other learning activities. Accredited courses and training programs, academic and professional conference, presentations and seminars, productions of science textbooks and distance education materials. These are the formal science communications. And now comes to the informal science communications. Examples of informal science communication, which are more often voluntary, non-assessed, accidental, and social, include science centers and museums, media programs or coverage on film, television, radio, or in print, community or internet forums on scientific topics, science groups, clubs, and societies. Next, computer-based activities on CD-ROM, DVD, or WWW. Science shows and theater, open days at universities and research organizations. Next, popular science books and magazines. Community or school-based involvement in collecting research data. Science competitions, events, and festivals. Now next is dialogue. So what is dialogue? Let's see. In spite of the prevailing bias toward presenting science to the public, science communication as defined here cannot be considered as a one-way dissemination of information to the lay public. Modern science communication is part of the contextual approach that sees the generation of new public knowledge about science much more as a dialogue in which, while scientists may have the scientific facts at their disposal, these members of the public concerned have local knowledge of and interest in the problems to be solved. So, all science practitioners are challenged to be science communicators and to enter into dialogue with their peers, with the public, and with mediators. However, in doing so, it is important to realize there is a critical need for feedback in any effective communication. Even television and radio that have been modeled as simple linear communication process are affected by feedback in the form of audience ratings. There is a possible change of meaning with the change of context. So clear, consistent, appropriate, and interactive dialogue is required. The use of jargon and other exclusive practices must be avoided. Now let's see the conclusion. So we have already learned some terms and some definitions of science communication. So what can be the conclusion? Let's see. Science communication has a vital part to play in modern society. Next, the proposed definition identifies AEIOU, that is, A stands for awareness, E for enjoyment, I for interest, O for U, and U for understanding of science as important personal responses to science communication. Science communication aims to enhance public scientific awareness, understanding, literacy, and culture by building AEIOU responses in its participants. It also empowers the public to attend, an interest in science, a confidence to talk about it, and a willingness to engage with science wherever and whenever it crosses their paths. And science communications also provides skills, media activities, and dialogue that we have learned before to enable the general public, mediators, and science practitioners to interact with each other more effectively. And finally, science communication is a significant field of enterprise worthy of going practice and research. Thank you.